So at a time when most manufacturers are starting to turn their back on sports bikes, and especially big litre sports bikes, Ducati has gone the other way. In fact, the message we got here at Vallelunga in Italy during the presentation of this, the new Panigale V4, was that Ducati would keep making sports bikes until the very end. They would be the last person standing. And if this here, the 7th generation Ducati sports bike, is anything to go by, I've got no reason to doubt them. So there's so much to talk about with this machine. It's all new. Actually, technically, I think 94% of it is new, which in my book means it's pretty much damn box fresh. So they've saved weight, they've upped the power. How have they done that? Well, to cut to it, with the engine, it's got new cams, it's got a different alternator, it's got a different oil cooler, it's got the gearbox that's come from the Superleggera V4. They put some fancy bits into it to make this bike as potent and usable as possible. Moving on from that, where have they saved the weight? Okay, so the front frame, as Ducati call it, again is new. The reason for that is that they wanted to save some weight. I think they've saved roughly about 700 grams with the front frame. They've also completely altered the torsional rigidity of it. It's got about 40% more flexibility than what it had before, which is what the riders were asking for. And at the back of the bike, you'll see this addition. So this is a feature that I did not expect to see on the Ducati. So the last time we saw a double-sided swing arm on the Ducati sports bike was with the 999. But here it is again. The reason for it, twofold. One, again, it's allowed the engineers to apply more lateral flex into the design of the swing arm. And secondly, it's saved loads of weight. Weight is such a big thing these days. And the reason for that is legislation is getting tougher. The emphasis on cleaner motors and more catalysts, etc., is only getting greater. So they've got to look to different ways to keep the weight down. And to ensure that that's been possible, they've gone in this direction. And they've already proved with this bike here at the Race of Champions at World Ducati Week that the package is roughly 1 second a lap quicker in the hands of pro riders. People like Francesco Bagnaia, who won that race at World Ducati Week, 1 second a lap quicker than what he was on the last version of the V4 Panigale that he was already accustomed to, his practice bike essentially. So Ducati are in a great place. The whole bike is in a fantastic place, and I'm really excited to be able to talk a little bit more about the spec of the machine. So I've actually got my notepad here because there's so much stuff to rattle off. So as I said, new frame, tweaked engine, more power, less weight. There's also a whole new tech suite on this bike. So Ducati have never been Luddites. They've always been at the forefront of technology on their sports bikes, but their Ducati Vehicle Observer System has just taken things to a whole new level. So I'm not going to go through all the details here today, partly because I don't even know half of them, but also we'd be here for a long time. But needless to say that everything you can imagine that is on this bike, so the traction control, the wheelie control, the slide control, all the customization that you can alter with this bike has taken a massive leap forward. So they've learned so much off the back of racing at World Superbikes and MotoGP, and they've tried to embed and grain a lot of that tech and the sophistication of those systems here into this street bike. Needless to say, this thing is on a whole different level, as I'll get onto when I start talking about what it's like to ride. And to control all that tech, the bike's also been kitted with a new, bigger dash. So again, this is GP derived. So off of the MotoGP machine, they've got a dash on this that is bigger, just about 7-inch in width. So much data there. It's so easy to kind of identify when you're riding what's going on. It's also super easy to tweak. There's great switch gears on the machine. So a bit of a kind of enhancement of what we've seen before on the Panigale, nothing too crazy, but the last system worked. And like I say, you know, the main thing is that when you look at the dash now, it's even easier to digest what's going on. And there's so much more depth to it. So we've been on a racetrack all day. We've had 6 sessions on track here at Vallelunga. I've not been able to kind of go through the rider modes and explore what it's like in rain, in road, in sport. You know, I've been sticking in race A, race B, and working on the major features that have allowed me to push harder on track and extract the best from this machine. That's where my focus has been. But needless to say, when I have wanted to go tweaking, it's been a doddle to hit those switches, get exactly what I want, and also to be able to play around with some of the cool features when you're on the race modes, such as live sector time, so you can see if your splits are up or down, as well as your live lap time. It's all done off of GPS. It's fantastic, easy on the eye system, and yeah, it's been an absolute treat to explore today. Moving on, I guess another big talking point is the new look of the bike. So you're going to hear this a lot, but Ducati say that the big influence behind this machine was the 916. And I dare say, we've seen some illustrations today during the presentation of this next to the 916, cut in half, etc. And you can see an influence, but obviously this is its own entity. This is very much a Panigale. It looks fantastic. It looks befitting of a flagship sports bike in 2024. Technically, this is a 25 machine, but it's actually going to be in shops. By the time you're watching this video, it will be in shops in the UK. This is the V4S, the model we've been riding. So this is priced just under £30,000. And the V4, so the standard bike, the major differences being that you've got manual suspension instead of the Öhlins Gen 3, electronic suspension on this bike here, and you're also losing out on the lightweight forged wheels that the V4S comes. A few more tweaks, but ultimately that's the difference. That's going to hit the market around 24.5 grand. So we're talking about the design. So the major influence of the new look and feel of the bike was to enhance how slippery this machine is. So Ducati claim that the new Panigale has 4% less drag. It's definitely more aerodynamic. They've got enhanced winglets as well. So the reason for that is they wanted a more consistent degree of downforce, and that's what that is giving this bike. So again, you got more front feel. The bike's less susceptible to wheelies. It's more stable, especially under braking. You know what wings are about nowadays. Every bike's got them, pretty much every bike anyway, every premium bike. And this next generation of wings is set to make the bike even more stable and planted and usable on track, especially when you're chasing those precious tenths or even hundredths. So the ergonomic triangle is pretty similar to what it was before. So you've still got the nice wide bars, you've got nice relaxed, quite high foot pegs, and you've got a nice tall perch as well. The big difference is that the seat is now larger, so in length it's increased, in width it's increased, and it's also a lot flatter than what it was before. What that means is that the rider isn't placed quite so, well, on their wrists essentially. There's a more level, usable platform to sit on. So another new addition, a new pioneering piece of technology is the Brembo High Pure calipers. Fantastic piece of kit. So we know Stylema R, but this is that next step along from Brembo. So you get the point. It's an exciting package. It's got the spec. It's got so many talking points, but what's it actually like to ride? So we were lucky enough to get 6 sessions here today under sweltering conditions. We couldn't have asked for a better situation to go and push this bike to its limits. And to make the experience even more special, we each got given our own engineer. We're going to do a separate feature on that at future point. But what that meant was that when we were riding, you had absolute clarity on your performance, what you were asking of the bike, what the bike was asking of you, etc. It's been an amazing day. But what I want to talk about first is how easy this machine is to ride. They're words that kind of don't make sense when you're talking about something so potent, so powerful, so focused, but actually getting on this bike and pushing hard on track, the first thing that hit me in the immediate first session, especially at a time when I was trying to learn the circuit, was how easy it was to kind of just ride, to place. The engine hit home, so as I said, it's slightly up on power. The engine jumped out for the fact that it was very linear in its delivery, very versatile low down. So another enhancement that was made to the engine was the velocity stacks have increased both in how far they go down and how high they go up. So essentially giving the bike a more usable spread of torque throughout the rev range. The ultimate gain, they put a bit of peak on it, but they made the engine a lot more usable throughout the rev range. And what I found straight away, taking this bike around the track, not really knowing the lines, etc., was that I was never really in trouble. The original Panigale that I tested back in 2018, that was a lot more of a brute. That was one of those bikes that it was far less forgiving. This thing here hit me straight away as something that was just great and easy to extract the best of the package without having to, be so specific with your gear selection or your revs or whatever. It was just a joy to ride. I'll come back onto the engine in a little more detail later. I also want to talk about my first impressions of the handling of this bike. So I hate the word neutral when you're trying to describe a machine, especially when you're on a racetrack. But what I was very mindful of was the fact that there was no kind of area when we were riding that kind of made me think, do you know what? I feel like I'm going to push the front. I feel like I'm going to lose the rear. It felt a very balanced motorcycle, packaged superbly well. And again, you know, this track here, it's got some ridiculously fast sections. The first corner, you're kind of on the limiter in fifth, over a blind crest before kind of swooping down into a fast right-hander and hard back on the throttle. It's a crazy circuit. And that's the first half of the circuit really, it's flat out. The second half is first gear, real tight, real twisty. The kind of place where actually you need a bike that's going to be forgiving. You're going to, you know, need that machine to accept that, I don't know, you're asking a lot of lean angle, at quite slow pace, etc., and then hard acceleration. You need something that's going to be stable, planted, offering good grip, good stability in on the brakes. And I quickly learned that that's exactly what the new Panigale gave me. It was something that I wasn't quite expecting, or, you know, expecting it to be so usable, so rider friendly. But as the day went on, and more to the point, as I started to understand how rubbish I was, and when compared to like Ducati's factory test rider, areas where I could push more and extract more from the machine, I really started to see a different side to this bike. So riding initially, I think I did a 1 minute free lap time around this circuit, just for context. I ended the day on a 46. The difference in pace, obviously 7 seconds, but the difference to me as a rider was just how alive this bike became. So when I was really pushing on, I started to get slides from the Pirelli Superbike slicks we've been riding on. I started to be able to feel when I was pushing hard into a corner that I was using, you know, all of the stroke or most of the stroke in the Olin suspension, and yeah, I was getting the bike squirming, I was fighting, I felt like I was bench pressing this thing into corners, and I had such a smile on my face as I was doing it because I learned to trust this bike. I learned to accept that whatever my limit was, the Ducati had another level of competence, in fact probably several more levels of competence. The fastest lap the factory test rider did on this bike was a 40. So yeah, I'm 6 seconds off that guy's pace. But for me, riding this bike, every single lap completed, I just gained more confidence, I gained more trust in the package. I learned to lean on the technology. So again, there are 5 different rider modes, and within those rider modes, 2 different levels of, well, there's race A and race B. And basically in race A, I had this thing weaned off, so traction control on one, slide control on one. I had the brake control, engine brake management on level 2, which is like the middle ground for engine braking, just to give me a bit more engine braking going into some of the corners. But pretty much everything, slide control, you name it was all weaned off to the most minimal of settings. But the thing that amazed me was, yes, on occasion I could get the rear wheel to slide, but more to the point, I was able to come out of corners. I mean, even just behind us here, this is like a big banked oval that fires you onto the start straight. It's an amazing bend. I was able to trust in the technology in the system and actually just crack that throttle, despite the fact that my knee was on the ground, trust in the traction control to kind of keep things safe, keep me in one piece and fire us out this corner as fast as was humanly possible. Actually, it took more time for me to get my head around just how good the electronics were than anything else. Like once I started trusting in them, this bike just took on a whole different level. And the data showed, so like I'm going to refer to the data quite a lot because that was such a telling thing throughout the day. Every time I referred back to it, I made progress in so many different areas. So coming back to the first corner that I mentioned here, I don't even know what the speed would have been, probably not that much under 300 kilometers per hour when you come over a blind crest and you want to kind of get on the brakes because, I don't know, your stomach drops within you, but actually you can't do that. You need to kind of hit this undulation, drop down to this fast right-hander and get straight back on the throttle, like full throttle. That's what the data guy was telling me and that's what I was doing. And again, just leaning on the systems to manage things, to keep me safe. I never had any big moments and I kept making that progress by trusting in the package. One of the areas I made the most progress on throughout the day was what they call the neutral zone. So basically going from throttle to braking. And when doing so, what that meant was for me, I had to have absolute faith in the braking performance of this bike. The consistency on the braking was unbelievable. I never had any moments, you know, where, I don't know, the lever starts to come a little bit too far back to you. There were no moments where ABS was kicking in. And I just want to talk actually about, I think there are 7 different levels of ABS or brake settings now on this bike. And my favorite of all was level 1. And level 1 was a combined system where basically I'm using that front brake lever. I'm not touching the rear brake, but a certain amount of rear brake is actually added into the mix. And what that did is it stabilized the bike, kept the bike more planted, helped me to get into a corner, helped me to turn tighter, especially around the back section in some of the first gear stuff. It was an amazing piece of technology. I could not really feel the engagement of the rear wheel, but I could feel the difference it made when I had that system engaged. Honestly, it's been a game changer. I'm not normally for that kind of thing. We've seen motorbikes in the past have combined brakes. It doesn't work, but on this machine here, it most certainly does work. And I think it's going to be, for people riding on track, it's going to be an absolutely huge asset. So if you get one of these, make sure to play around with it. So coming back to the engine actually, so the numbers aren't massively different. You know, this bike was a beast before and it's a beast now. If you take everything off, if you get rid of the wheelie control, if you get rid of the traction control, etc., you could cause yourself some real harm. But the beauty of this machine is not only is the spread of power so strong from kind of the mid-range all the way right up to the top, to the point where the dash is lit up and it's saying, please change gear now, and you select that next gear. But the spread of power is so good. It's so exciting. I mean, it's the nearest, I guess, this bike has been to feeling like an inline four. You rev this thing so high, about 14,000 RPM. I think peak power is at about 12.5 or something like that. But anyway, you can rev this thing out as much as you want. It picks up revs super fast, but like I said, the spread of power is just so consistent and easy. The connection with the throttle to the rear wheel is beautiful. So in these first gear sections on the track, yeah, one of my first apprehensions, especially at big lean, full lean, was being able to get on that throttle. And there was a huge delay between my head saying go and my hand actually turning that throttle until later in the day, where actually I knew, trust the system, get driving. There's so much grip as well. I mean, these tires are fantastic, I should say that. Like I said, they are the full 265 Superbike slicks that you see on TV. So we've been super lucky to use those. But yeah, the fact that you can just get on that throttle so hard and punch out of corners, and yeah, you might get a bit of a wheelie or, you know, a moment where the bars kind of cross up a little bit, but there's nothing too major. Hook another gear and away you go again. It's a beautiful motor and definitely the most seamless and user-friendly V4 from Ducati as of yet, and also, as I said, the most powerful. So what they've done is given you a platform that's going to push you and you're riding on, not scare the crap out of you and make you want to take this bike back to a dealership. And I applaud that. I mean, if you want more power, you can buy the full race system for this machine. I think it gives you like 14 horsepower more just through bolting that system on. So if you want more power, you can find it in a jiffy. But actually, this amount of power on this machine here is more than enough for most people, especially considering, again, this is a street bike. That's the mad thing about this. It's so sophisticated, it's so competent, and across the course of the day, I just really learned to trust it, to kind of push my own limits, to have absolute faith in the fact that the chassis was going to look after me, the fact that the technology on it was so good, it was so far ahead of me and my competence that I didn't have to worry about stuff like, yeah, high siding or washing the front or whatever. There are all these safety nets in there. And the best thing about the technology, just while I'm talking on that area, is that you don't always notice anything going on. So this bike, as per the Panigale V4 before it, has got a light up display. So you can see, you know, if you're using wheelie control, you can see the wheelie control kicking in. You can see the traction control kicking in. The reason behind that is that, again, if you want to start pushing the limits, sometimes you've got to wean the tech off. And if you see those things engaged, well, you can go a step back. I mean, like I said, for me, I had it on traction control level 1 all day, the most minimal, you know, that you can have. But even still, you know, that thing was lighting up. I just wasn't really able to feel it. And I find that amazing. You know, pushing this bike as hard as I have today, as hard as I could. My hands are blistered, my body's aching. I've given it all that I could actually give it. And yeah, throughout the entirety of the experience, the only time I ever felt the electronics kick in was actually, there was a little bit of lag on a few occasions when I was upshifting. Maybe I didn't quite hit the gear selector hard enough. And that was one of those moments where you kind of, your helmet nearly goes through the screen. But I think that was more rider error than a reflection of the system, because largely, you know, or actually for the majority of the day, 95% of the time, I had absolutely seamless shifts up the box, and with the blipper on this, it's unbelievable. I'm not a fan of using first gear, but with the blipper on this, you can hardly even tell that you've gone down a gear. It's so sophisticated. It is so Ducati. They are the absolute kings of technology, and they've just delivered all that good stuff straight out of MotoGP onto this street platform. There's nothing you could wish for. It's been a totally amazing experience. I feel like I've explored probably half the potential of this machine here today, and what that tells me is I need to get back on one sooner rather than later to keep on finding more and more beauty within this package, because this thing doesn't just look great, it rides great. And if you're into your sports bikes, you need to go and give one of these a try.